So first of all, thanks everyone for joining. We have a really interesting topic, something I'm not too familiar with, so I'm excited to learn about this, is better tabletops. And we've got Dave and Andy. Hopefully you guys have seen Dave and Andy on previous webinars. They both have done these tabletops sometimes dozens of times within different settings before they joined Feedly, and now they're going to share some of their wisdoms with us. So really excited to run through this. As always, we will be recording this and we will send out a copy of the slides as well as a copy of the recording to everyone who registered. We'll also be posting the recording on the Feedly website on feedly.com/CTI-sessions after it's all prepped and ready to go. So expect that tomorrow. Um, the other thing I'd like to say is if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. Don't use the chat. We kind of close the chat. It can cause some noise, but if you put it in the Q&A, we'll be happy to try to jump in and answer your question. If it's a question that makes sense for everybody else to hear on the audience, then we'll break into the conversation and ask that question live. Otherwise, we might handle it in the background. And even if we don't get to your question, we will publish the answers, or at least our reply to the question in the response that comes with the email. So thanks so much for joining, and let's kick this off. So we want to go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry. It says screen looks blank.
There we go.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay.
All right. So as always, I'd like to give a little promo for Feedly. So if you're not familiar with Feedly, Feedly helps you manage your workflows, your operational intelligence workflows from collecting the information that you need through processing, through analysis, and finally dissemination of your reports. We start with all the trusted sources that you can collect. Feedly has over 10,000 that we've determined are on the trusted side. We bring those into our AI and we pull out all the entities and the objects, and we associate them with each other and we put them in our threat graph. And the value of that is that it gives context to everything that we have in Feedly. So if you want to understand how something is related to something else, you can find those connections very easily in Feedly. So if you are in vulnerability, if you're looking at a vulnerability use case and you're trying to understand the implications of a particular CVE, has it been exploited, but also is it related to any attacks? Is it related to a particular threat actor? Is a particular malware exploiting it? All those connections are helped through the threat graph. You can ask questions. So if you have particular inquiries that you want to do, you can either use the Ask AI feature, which is it's a task-oriented AI. It allows you to do a particular task in that particular moment. So if you're looking at a couple of articles and you want to understand what's in those articles, it looks at the content of those articles and doesn't really expand beyond that except to maybe check with a threat graph and make sure it looks sense. But it helps confine the responses to something that's limited to what you're currently asking about. And that Ask AI, the task-oriented AI, also carries through to things like our report builder and automated newsletters that allow you to focus that particular AI task on the thing that you're doing right there. So it's not like a general LLM. It's really focused on that particular task that you're doing at the point in time. So I'll leave it with that. We'll have more to say about our different workflows and how we support them in the future. But for right now, we'll just call that the Feedly advertisement. We'll get in and we'll talk to Dave and Andy. So Andy, I'll let you start with a quick introduction of yourself. Andy's going to be talking about the tabletop exercise and what they bring. And then Dave, you just follow on to Andy's introduction in just a sec.
Hey, for those who haven't seen me before, I'm Andy. Uh, Background is in Intel. Degree's been in intelligence analysis. I've been in CTI for almost a decade at this point. And I'm also in the Army Reserves as a cyber fusion intel officer. So yeah, so today I'll be talking about what tabletop exercises are, kind of some of the history, and kind of what CTI brings in regards to that.
All right, thanks, Andy. My name is Dave Johnson. I've been on a few of these. I have about 14, 15-ish years of CTI experience, including IR and some detection engineering work. And yeah, so I'll be covering sort of all the experience I've had in building cyber tabletop exercises. I've done about 50 or more in my last couple roles, and I'll show you like kind of what goes into them, things to avoid, and things that work for me, and how to build one with Feedly and Claude too. And
Hey,
Claude,
I had a note in the Q&A that the screen looks blank. Can somebody just type into the Q&A saying it's you can see the screen that we're showing? It should be an agenda slide right now. I can see it. Great. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, well, we will continue on. One thing we'd like to do here is a quick finish the sentence questions. These are meant to be your first thought, your best thought. And so the first one, the easy one for you guys is, what is one thing you're looking forward to this summer? Andy.
Ooh, ooh. Uh, probably some more motorcycle riding.
Awesome. Dave.
nice. Yeah. I think just like not picking up snow and just going outside, going for a hike, like anything, tennis, basketball. Yeah, those are kind of my jam. Just being outside.
Well, Dave, we went from no winter to spring to summer in a week here in Colorado. So
Yeah,
we don't have any snow.
that's about right.
Okay, one more question. Without giving away the answers to everything, what is my top tip for tabletop exercises is, Andy?
Have fun with it. Get creative, for sure.
Dave?
Make everyone participate. No observers.
Awesome. Okay. All right. We'll get into that in just a sec. And Andy's going to take us off. Again, if you guys have a question, please just put it in the chat and we will try to answer it. Thank you.
Cool. And with that, we'll start with the problem, right? What is the problem here? Is that a lot of tabletop exercises are a compliance checkbox. And so as a result, people just kind of haphazardly, lacklusterly do the thing, right? They just create generic scenarios so that they can say that they've met the requirement for the year, right? And so as a result, people pass it, right? And then they have a false confidence that they've done the thing, right? And so then they're like, oh, we're ready, right? We're prepared. But the whole point, right, is to um, identify those blind spots that your team can't see, or to see those detections in coverage and your gaps, visibility, right? So this is kind of the general problem that we're seeing with tabletops, or it takes a lot of time to generate some of this stuff, and so as a result, people then do create generic scenarios, again, building into those other problems that you see here. So today we're going to try and talk about how we can develop better ones, and make it a little bit more realistic. So going back, right, as they joke, as you get older, you start getting more sentimental and start looking at history. And so in preparation for this webinar, I started doing some research into the evolution of tabletops, and ultimately, excuse me, right, they evolved from military. Things like simple games like chess, right? It was demonstrating where you can use little pieces to simulate, or um, emulate different units, or pieces within a battlefield. People then started developing things even greater, right? Kriegsspiele, from the Prussians, simulating more realistic battlefields as opposed to very static black-white squares. Because the idea is you don't want the first time your team to encounter an engagement to be their very first time doing that thing, right? And so we like to say, practice like you fight, in the Army. So we've created the Army created things like Army training centers, ANTC over California, and Fort Irwin. I had the pleasure of going to Fort Polk, where I got to be real life world support, providing support to the Army when I was still in the Air Force back then. And just watching those guys operate and see how they do it in real life, right? Downloading cargo from heavy aircraft, doing that. So you can actually see, they even had like explosions and real munitions going off. So just really getting a good feel for what it would be like in those downrange. Um, the special forces, they'll even build like full-on structures. So, for example, the Bin Laden compound, they built out a real life-size mock-up before they even went and touched ground there, right? So that they could have the muscle memory of being able to say, hey, this is how we're going to sweep this corner, or how we're going to enter this particular room. And so having that muscle memory before the thing happens, right? During OCS, we're taught how to build sand tables so that we can brief before those operations and to build out, like a visual memory of the space that you're going to be operating in. And so a lot of this can actually be evolved and transferred to the private sector, right? So I'm talking a lot about physical kinetic effects, but taking these same ideologies and applying it to things like network maps and translating those terminologies from the military over to the cyberspace and the civilian private sector, right? Removing keywords like key terrain and changing it to things like what are your critical assets or what are your business critical things, right? So what is a cyber tabletop, right? Like I mentioned, translating that over to the private sector. It's really just a guided discussion simulation, right? So talking through an event, a scenario before it happens, hopefully, right? And so there's not really it's not high stakes because you're not playing with things that are live or production systems, but you definitely need to have people playing their actual roles because they're going to be the most familiar with that, so that you're not making up things on the fly. So definitely have the various stakeholders, and I know it's going to be hard to get your CEO or other C-suite execs in the room, but it's definitely very important to practice these so that we can say, hey, like we've run these scenarios, we know how we're going to respond, or if we don't already have a playbook, we can then create that, right? Evolving stages. It definitely needs to evolve through time. So it's not just a singular event like, here's a phishing link, they clicked it, now what, right? There needs to be even more to it, right? So we can talk through like a full kill chain potentially. Like I mentioned, pressure decisions, right? We need to practice like we fight, right? Like use the playbooks that are already there. Look through your policies, run through those. Because the idea isn't ultimately to pass, and it's not to like slap people's hands, bad IR, you don't have this policy or playbook, but rather to show, where we need to improve our processes so that when something does happen, we're already prepared for those. Dave.
Hey, you got me now?
Hey, Dave, just one second. Before you do that, I forgot to ask that poll question. Can I just do that real quick and get guidance from the audience on how I'll just launch it right now. You guys see the poll? Just curious what your experience with tabletop exercises is. So hopefully help guide the speakers a little bit.
Participate. A lot of participants here, it looks like. Just here for the jokes.
Yeah, I'm liking, yeah.
All
One
right, so
person, yeah.
I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. So hopefully everybody can see the results. And yeah, so you can see 39% said they've created or led tabletop exercises, 42% have participated, and 17% have never participated. And there's a couple, one person's here just for the jokes, which I'm good for that. I'm good for that. Okay, thanks. Hopefully that helps you guys. You have a better idea of the level of familiarity with this. Oh, there was one question from the chat I think is really important. Dave, finish the sentence. My favorite kind of cookie is.
Oh, chocolate chip.
Andrew.
Oh, Thin Mints all the way. The Girl Scouts got it.
Oh, come
Okay.
on. I don't know.
All right, guys. I just ate a oatmeal chocolate chip that we made this weekend, and it was the best. So, all right, go on.
Okay. Um, yeah, thanks, Andy, for all that. I think that was super good grounding. So I think so based on the participation and the poll, a lot of people have run them or at least been in them. But you might be doing it kind of begrudgingly, like you have to do it. It's a requirement. It's not fun. But I honestly think when I've done all the ones I did, I used to do them on a monthly basis. for I think over 6 years or so. Um, at first, it was not fun, and people didn't know each other. You didn't have good dynamics. Part of the reason you have tabletops is to build the relationships between teams so that when you get into a crisis situation, it's not the first time you're reaching out to a person. So they're not just like regulatory. They're definitely regulatory, especially in certain industries. So I think with healthcare, especially, but they use them as an opportunity to get to know people and to know the inputs and outputs of different teams. And once you have that, you have a better understanding of the dynamics. There's always some kind of politics at where you work, and it's kind of a way to kind of navigate those politics to know how a team functions. So I think that's why it matters quite a bit. It's more for that social intelligence angle. You can think tabletops, and this is how I started. They're purely technical. Like, oh, do we have this technical capability or do we not? That's not the only types of gaps you should be worried about. At my last place, it was in consulting, and you focus really on people, process, and technology. So not everything is a technical gap. Definitely there is a technical gap, but when you're talking about like spear phishing and things like that, there are technical controls you can use for sure. But how do you respond to it? What is what is your investigation chain look like once you receive a ticket? Like when does the service desk know when to escalate something to another team? So having these things, I think, is really a reason why tabletops matter, and it builds that muscle memory. Andy, I saw you kind of smiling a little bit, maybe reacting. Is any of this like resonating with you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like just knowing how people actually operate and like learning kind of about other people for the cross team coordination, right? Like you're like, oh, I recognize that the person works this way or they like the information this particular way. You only find that out through something like this, right? And so it's really neat. It's just it was making me think back of to an exercise that I was recently a part of where I was training a nation's partner state and they were like, yeah, we've never actually talked to some of these other people before. And during the tabletop that we're running through with them, they actually were like, yeah, now we know who they are and have faces. So it's you make a really good point. It just
Exactly.
resonated for sure.
Awesome. All right, next one, next slide, please. Yeah, who needs to be in the room? So when I first started, I didn't think this was that important. Like, oh, you could have like maybe a slice of the pie here, but you need you should almost not do the exercise if you don't have the right people. Sometimes you can still kind of go through the motions, but if you don't, if you have something that requires a lot of legal oversight into something, maybe a compromise of client data or something like that, where there's huge legal ramifications, no one on the team, if you're not a lawyer and actively working this subject, you're not going to know how to respond appropriately. So it's really important to have the right people in the room. And if you can't, then I would postpone that tabletop until you do have the right people. And it's really important. Otherwise, you'll go through the whole thing and it won't be based in reality. And any gaps you see are going to be artificial until that subject matter expert in that team weighs in. And any after action report that you generate, it's not going to be as good as it could be. So really just have the right people. You don't need to have the whole team. It could be just a delegate. You know, they basically nominate someone a delegate. It could be a rotating responsibility. So a lot of this goes into preparation for a tabletop. Most of my time, I felt like, well, part of it was planning it for sure, but then scheduling it was actually like pretty tricky to do. That was one of the hardest parts of it, is like making sure everyone was there. And then when I say in the room, preferably this is something where it's a live exercise where you actually sit at a table. I know in today's work environment, it's really difficult. Sometimes you have not a lot of people in the same place, even in the same state or city. So do the best you can. It's kind of like when you take classes at a university and you're the professor maybe, and you have students dial in remote, you don't know if they're working or not. They could be taking a nap. And I noticed when I ran exercises where I had remote people come in from different teams, they might not say anything the entire exercise, but if you get them there in person, there's nowhere to hide. So you really like you don't want to make it stressful and not fun at the same time. There's a balance, but having people in person really helps. At least turn the camera on. I think that's really important. It might be dependent on your culture at work, but cameras on at least I think would really help that dynamic. So it's kind of going into what makes an effective meeting, right? You want everyone to participate, you want people to be engaged, and the more uh, ways that you can look at someone and interact with them, the more engaged they're likely to be. But that's all I've got for this one. So to make an effective exercise, it really starts with tons of pre-work. I would advocate for not doing exercises necessarily every month. I actually went to a training on tabletops. I think CrowdStrike put it on. And I talked to their people who do tabletops as a service. And I said, hey, I'm doing monthly tabletops. And they were just flabbergasted because it's really hard to prep that much. There's a lot of pre-work that goes into a tabletop. A tabletop might take maybe an hour total, but then you're doing days and days of meeting, coordination with different stakeholders to figure out the personal details of your exercise. So there's a lot of pre-work that goes into it. So when you do that, you kind of need to get it in front of people and tell them what the expectations are for the exercise. This is the time, place, the details. Here's your role. Here's what expected of you. So having those expectations up front, I think, go a long way. So people are not wondering, like, what is this? I have no idea what's going on. And then that was kind of the number one on this slide, the pre-brief. So just, don't overshare details because you want to have a fog of war mentality going into it. They should not know all the things that are happening. They should know that there's going to be something happening and how they're supposed to react, maybe like the guidelines of how they participate. Number two is about the actual injects. And so these are like the specific events that are triggered that kind of escalate things as the tabletop goes on. Some people like to use different words for this. It could be a curveball, something that kind of escalates the situation. It's a new piece of information, a new event that forces a decision. So I'll go over like kind of what makes a good inject later, but that's the vernacular. You call it injects in tabletop planning. Open discussion, that's really the one of the most important parts. If people aren't openly discussing the injects and how they're reacting, then the exercise is kind of pointless. You could do all this pre-work, but then if you don't have a facilitator that can kind of like gauge things and direct the environment and the questions, and kind of tease things out of people, it's not going to be a good open discussion. So, and there's also a lot of confusion in tabletops and comparing that to a full scale exercise. So full scale exercises are, think military, like everything's being planned out. You have a white team, you have a red team, a blue team, and like all these different components. A tabletop is just people sitting around a table, right? And so when you share an inject, you really shouldn't be too fancy. You should really focus on sharing it to the whole group because the open communication, open discussion, I think is more important in that situation. And in a full scale exercise, you might get a text or an email that says exercise, exercise, exercise. This thing has happened. That's a little bit too elaborate for a tabletop. It should be really dumbed down. Not in content wise, but it should be open to everyone. I mean, another thing that helps a lot too is the facilitator should not be the note taker. And having that as a different role, I think really kind of changed things for me. I had a technical writer at my last job who was fantastic. He didn't know, you know, a ton about cybersecurity, but he was a technical writer and knew when things were important, and he was a good thinker. You just need to have someone, and sometimes it's good to have a little bit of an outlier who's not an expert to ask the obvious questions and to take detailed notes. But having that real-time note taker, I think, is important. You could have AI do it, but for tabletop, sometimes you're dealing with things that are really sensitive. So it's important to have someone who has that organizational context kind of fermented in their brain. Fermented. I forget the name. What is it?
Rotten
What
in
is
their
it,
brain.
guys? There we go. Something in their brain to have that context to take really good notes. And then at the end, the exercise, say you do the final inject. Maybe you have a 1 hour and you do like 3 injects and people respond to it. That's resolution. Everything's over. Not quite. You have a hot wash, and that's where you have an immediate debrief where people give their impressions and maybe a little bit of perspective on what they could have done better, where they were uncertain, where they would like to drill into because they didn't know how to do something. And then that's where the facilitator kind of spills the beans and tells them what really happened. And then with that in their mind, the participants would have said, "Oh man, I would have done this differently if I knew this." And so capturing those details, I think, is incredibly important. And you want to do that, you want to have that really quickly after the exercise because people forget things. If you do it 3 days out, people will forget. It's like cramming for an exam, right? You don't want to, do it all and then 3 days later you're not going to remember anything. Um, and then the AAR is the after action report. And that's where you take the note taker's content, the hot wash, your own impressions as a facilitator, and you roll that up into a relatively short document. I don't like long documents. It could be a presentation as well, but something that is very pointed and action oriented. Things that we did well, the things that we need to work on. And then I like to always break it out by people, process, and technology in those different categories.
Yeah, I like the AAR too, Dave, because we do those in the army, and one of the ways we do it is like what happened or what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, improves and sustains, and kind of your template there kind of matches that as well.
Awesome. That's it for that slide. And is this me, Andy, or you? I can't
Uh,
remember.
I think this one was you still.
Okay.
CTIs
Yeah.
were kind of jump
So
back in. Yeah.
I love talking about bad things. So I was drawn to cybersecurity. So common mistakes. I mean, I've been through a lot. I mean, I've made mistakes myself, especially me, I think. So before the exercise, picking something that is kind of sexy and like, oh, like this elaborate attack that you see, APTs. No. I mean, you can focus on APT groups for sure, but think about your bread and butter. Actually watch the news. Use something like Feedly and actually figure out like the kinds of attacks that are happening in your sector, in your industry, and even supply chain dependencies or um, yeah, like technical suppliers, like it could be a Microsoft outage or something like that. Things that maybe a little bit are more mundane and more probable and to actually run through a scenario on. Because like picking really exotic things is not going to really be that interesting. You're going to lose credibility basically if you pick really like non-realistic things to focus on. That's why I always ground things in your intelligence requirements. I love having a CTI background because I know in order to drive impact in an organization, you really need to ground everything in threats in the real threat landscape. And also before the exercise, like I mentioned before, having the wrong people in the room or a fraction, if you just have your technical people, you're going to miss out on all the legal complexities, the higher level decision making from leadership, other IT teams. If you don't have any business leaders, they're not going to learn either. And that's like really important. You're basically socializing cybersecurity and how important it is across the business. And that's basically like part of what I was doing is like I felt like I was selling cybersecurity on my own team, across the org. And so I think that's a really important thing that to not lose focus on. Also, before the exercise, you might have a good scenario, but you're not personalizing it enough to have clear objectives that you're trying to tease out. So maybe you know that there's issues with DLP, data loss prevention, or it could be something with zero trust in your implementation. Like focus on sort of the gray zones that people aren't really comfortable with. And I think that will help you clarify a lot of things that you need to focus on. There's a little bit of politics sometimes, so be a little bit careful about picking on things that are a little bit organizationally sensitive, but sometimes those are the right things to focus on too. During the exercise, I feel like my big turning point was when I was comfortable with silence, like a therapist, and they just don't say anything and let you expound and come to the realization yourself. That's what a facilitator feels like. You don't want to coach people towards correct answers. You want to just let things sit and let people get uncomfortable. And so, like, this doesn't sound like fun, right? But it can be. Like, you bring the fun with the positive energy and the expectations, and it's like there's no real consequences. This is to avoid consequences. This is a cyber attack simulation, right? And you don't want to correct people or push them towards an answer because to make things easier. So have a little bit of discomfort and being okay with that, I think is a really important skill to have. Another thing was passive observers instead of active participants. That was one of the biggest things I realized. You might have, and this is common in many meetings where you have one or two people who are really active, but then the others don't chime in. So it's kind of like the teacher calling on the quiet students in the class, or maybe they represent a certain group in the org and say, "Hey, does corporate communications have anything to say about this? What do you think about this?" Like having open questions. What do you think about this instead of what would you do? Can make things a little bit easier for teams that are a little bit less a little bit more hesitant to talk. And also during the exercise, I noticed that there is a need to really think through who takes charge in an incident. And sometimes the group doesn't really want to own up to anything. And so establishing sort of that team structure, who's doing what, I think is really important. And who's the incident manager? Who are they reporting to? Who's doing the technical work? So establishing those roles, I think, are really important. And after the exercise, if you go through the trouble of making an after action report with recommendations and nothing gets actioned, then the exercise was sort of a waste of time. You might have gotten to know people, which is great. I like to see like the silver lining. You got to work with different people. You kind of grease the grooves a little bit. But if you're not actually trying to fix things and implement changes in your org, then that's really defeating the whole purpose of a tabletop. And I think some of the regulatory compliance things with tabletops, you have to like identify actions that you're taking, but take it a step further and actually try having a register, maybe even a risk register that your org maintains and associating it with that. So if someone owns that risk, someone can have that grenade of risk and they have to do something with it. Let's see here. The incident response plan. Sometimes you're involving your procedure paperwork and things like that, but you should also use tabletop and how it went to really iron out any kinks in your incident response plan. So, who would do what? When do you do 24/7 monitoring? What are those thresholds of coverage of things that, cause the organization to change, and sort of go into this overdrive mode. So if you don't know what those thresholds are, then you need to figure that out. And that's why you have exercises like this to figure out what those turning points are. If there's a ransomware attack, who has decision-making authority to pay out the ransom? Do you pay out the ransom in the first place? These are all things you should have thought of before you actually get ransomed. And after the exercise, oh, same scenario used year after year. Speaking of ransomware, a ransomware attack, another ransomware attack. That's probably the most often used scenario, but think about less conventional things that are high impact and not super complicated. Maybe it could be a disgruntled insider, someone who has continued access to your internal accounts. It could be super mundane, but having more like insider threat related stuff, I think is really helpful because it's sort of dual purposed. An insider, some of those things can be applied to an outsider that gets into your system as well. So kind of think outside the box. And we'll talk about how to use Feedly and the news in order to figure out some good ideas. All right.
Yeah. And to your point, right? Like CTI informed, right? This allows some of that a novel approach, right? Instead of using the same exercise, you see it in the Army a lot too. People will just copy and paste from last year's exercise and they'll just maybe make a tweak here and there and change it. But for the most part, it's really just copy and paste. And that's what they joke about making a good exercise is really just copy paste. So using CTI to help not only create a better like scenario, but again, making it more realistic, providing the context around your organization and making it much more personalized really makes this more useful, right? So to kind of talk about it in practicality, first identify those threat actors that are most relevant to your org, right? People who have targeted you before, or those that are active in your, in your industry, targeting your peers, so on and so forth, right? Pull their TTPs, right? Get that minor attack framework, layer, show truly like, hey, here's how they would do it, right? And then align that with your environment, then build the scenario, right? So then once we have that scenario built, then you can start designing those injects. Dave mentioned having those injects that force the scenario to move along, right? So that they're not just kind of aimlessly looking at logs or something, or like talking about like things that don't matter, right? And then of course, do the thing, right? Don't just keep dungeon mastering the whole thing. Actually, do run the scenario. So, what does make a good inject? So I really enjoyed making injects. I got to be part of a white cell validation exercise and to create some of these injects. And so obviously that was a much larger operation, but I think what makes good injects are, keep it ambiguous, right? Don't ever give them the answer. The idea is to prompt them, but not give them the answer. So you want them to start looking into a particular scenario or a certain area, or start thinking about a general direction. But it should never give them the answer, obviously, right? Because that's kind of cheating. Right? It gives them the answer and then that's it. It should escalate the pressure, right? It should force people to do something, right? Or it makes the pressure harder. Our army exercises, right? Like people, they'll be like, "Oh, this squad is now dead." Right? This squad is no longer effective, and so then now people have to pivot and to now change the way that they're going to do something as a result. So maybe in the private sector scenario, it's like, "Oh, your sysadmin or whoever, right, was responsible for patching that system. They went on family leave. They're gone, right? You can't call them anymore, or something happens, right?" So trying to come up with like really like realistic things too, cross-functional by design, right? Like legal gets involved, right? Like, okay, so now what, right? Like there's a legal hold on this particular person that needs to be fired or whatever, right? But there's a legal hold because they can't get rid of this person. Like, how does that play into this, right? And so then like trying to figure out like, oh, or when it comes to what are our legal requirements for reporting this incident? What are the material effects that occurred, right? Or what is our reporting timelines? maybe an FBI flash report comes out, right? And like now it's like, oh, or whatever. So adding the cross functionality there helps to draw in, right? To Dave's point, how do we get other team members involved in the conversation? And again, as I mentioned about previously, as part of the prep, pull those TTPs, right? It needs to be really rooted in adversarial behavior, so that it makes the scenario feel real, right? And so that it's not just like some crazy offhand thing. It's actually like, hey, this is feasible, right? So people can actually see, hey, this could happen in our environment, or how that could impact them. Uh, and then time deliberately, right? Like you can't just like keep throwing injects and just like constantly just degrading the team. It needs to kind of happen for a reason. Like, this happens at a certain particular point. And so you can actually, in some of the bigger exercises that I've been in, you can actually see the timeline of like when injects are meant to be dropped. And then you can actually like see little flow charts of like when, if this happens, decision trees, this inject occurs, and so on and so forth. So don't just like randomly throw people and just get rid of people just for the sake of it. It should really be deliberate when something comes out. Dave, I know you had some other inject things you were probably going to mention too.
Hey, I had a question, guys. I see
Mhm.
these things feel like they're increasing the pressure and making things kind of stressful for people. Have you guys ever tried to make things more fun?
No,
Like
never.
never. It's not part of the goal.
Well, I think part of the fun is where you create a dynamic. So, like, the facilitator, I think, has a really important role in making everything positive and encouraging participation and turning stress into something like a fun challenge. Um, so it is stressful by design, but it doesn't have to be an ordeal. So. Yeah, it's just, I think it's a shift in attitude and it doesn't happen all at once. You might need to have a few tabletops with the same people to for them to kind of learn and get comfortable with it. At first, people are like really clammed up and they're afraid that like everyone's judging them. You just have to make a no judgment or a judgment-free zone. For me, I encourage like silence when people are trying to make decisions, but then I also kind of think out loud and give sort of I try to be talkative. I'm normally an extra introvert pretty much by my full personality is pretty much introvert, but then I completely like flip the switch when I'm doing a tabletop. I try to try to be much more encouraging to people. So it's just like the facilitator attitude, I think. Um,
Nice.
yeah.
Okay. Inject framework, inject design framework, right? So as I mentioned, you don't want to give them all the information at once, right? You don't want to give them all the answers. So you need to really think about like what new information is going to be surfaced, who will this ultimately impact, what decision will this require of those that are being impacted, and then also provide, like I mentioned, right, a decision tree. What could go wrong if they don't respond well, right? And so it helps to have these pre-planned, as opposed to like running these off the top of your head, because otherwise you'll just use like something like, I don't know, someone got ran over by a bus, and then it becomes very very not like uh, progressing the scenario along.
Yeah, I got one thing to add on that, Andy. I actually tried to plan it too much, and I had like different branches for different injects and things like that. It ended up making it one of the worst exercises I ever ran. So I think there's a balance of
Yeah.
how much planning you do. And actually did a exercise where someone was hit by a bus. We did it just for fun.
No
This
way.
guy was hit by a bus. And when he's out, he's on, and actually what ended up happening, he had a bicycle accident and he was out of commission for like half a year or something like that. So I mean, those are, that's the thing. When you're planning it too, sometimes take the participants and ask them for ideas, for things that they want to explore in the next tabletop. So that's another, I think, piece of advice. You get the participants a little bit more into like the planning mode as well. Then they get
Yeah,
excited when that situation comes up. So,
nice. And then I'll hand it back off to you for some more
all right.
building it.
Yeah. So Claude had an outage a little bit ago, and then Feedly, our website had a little bit of a hiccup. So of course it happens the day of this like little demo here I was going to do. So I was going to show you how to do this in Feedly and not being like too hard of a marketing pitch type of thing. Um, Let me just show you
Stop
briefly, and
sharing
then I'll
here.
show using the Feedly MCP server in Claude how I would do it today if I were to do tabletops again. So in Feedly, see here, there we go. Can you see this okay? It's the
Yep.
Cyberattack Agent says so when you get into Feedly, you're taken to this threat landscape dashboard. And this is like your starting point in Feedly, and you'll see sort of the big trending stories coming up. Some of these might be really good ideas to kick off. Something for a tabletop. This PyPI light LLM malware was really interesting. So a supply chain type of thing. So this is like a really easy like source of a good material, like kind of what's tracking in the news. But then we also have this concept of Intel agents. And the Intel agents are a way for us to sort of automatically search for things that they could be TTPs, vulnerabilities, like different kinds of entities that are key to cybersecurity. And so we have an Intel agent for a cyber attack. And so what they basically are, they're updated tables that are structured to pull down any new attacks or any updates to existing attacks. And what we do is we kind of give you an overview of each one. You have a what and a so what, and you have a description of the attack. You can go into it and get like the rundown with the timeline of what happened. I would have loved this back in the day, but now I'm on the vendor side of things, so I just have to sit back and kind of watch. But I would definitely use this as a starting point for a tabletop exercise. And what I would do is, hypothetically, let's say that I work at a company called Acme Incorporated, right? And we're in the financial services sector. Say we're in the US. So what I would do is start off with this agent. I would pick a time frame. You could do a custom range, but let's look at past 30 days and we can look for trending cyber attacks. And then let's filter on industry as well. Let's do financial.
David, do you want
Financial.
to close that window that you have in the bottom?
Oh no, I wanted to show everyone. We're doing a
So
webinar.
they can register for the webinar they're
Hey, yeah,
watching.
what? Yeah, I should register for that one. Spoiler, that's this one. So this is kind of a cool capability here. You can actually, with our Intel agents, filter. You can come up with some pretty elaborate filters. You can do it by company size. You can focus on enterprise companies, um, finance industry, or banking. So we have pretty straightforward Boolean logic when it comes to creating our filters. But this is a really rich source of data for tabletop exercises, I would think. I'm going to search for one in particular because I was kind of looking at this before. I'm going to do it based on company. I'm going to look for a company called Ameriprise Financial, and they were just implicated in a breach or an attack recently. Let's see here. Maybe it's not trending. Yeah, and then the outage just happened here. So, wah, wah. It's a bad demo. Let me try one more time. There we go. So Here's one that's really interesting. It's shiny hunters, targeting exfiltrating Salesforce PII. So pretty big potential implication here. In the fictional organization that I created, a lot of the tech stack and the processes we have match what Ameriprise Financial has. So this is a really good start to kind of coming up with a tabletop. And so in a lot of places in Feedly, we've got this kind of green sparkle button. And for this one, you can use it to take all the data that corresponds to this attack to an LLM that we interface with. And that's optimized to kind of pull our data using our threat graph. And so what I'm going to do is put in a prompt. This is a prompt that we'll share as one of the resources from this presentation. But in this one, basically tell it a little bit about yourself. And that's one of the key things with tabletops. You want to really try to personalize as much as you can, but it's a balance because, depending on your comfort level, you don't want to like send all this to an LLM that's hosted by a third party. There's a little bit sensitivity with it, so you can be a little bit more generic in some of the variables that you put in. But I try to define some ground rules, ground every inject in actual TTPs, use real details, and then adapt to the audience type. And I think that's really key. So you don't want to have threat actors thrown in front of executives. They don't want to see, scattered spider. They'll be confused and thrown off, and perhaps angry that they'll see that. I've had that happen before. So just adapt the tone. So all this knowledge that we talked about in the presentation is kind of distilled into this prompt as best as I could. So yeah, we could just hit this. It might take a while. Oh, it didn't. It happened really quick, which is awesome. So you'll see the format I have is a 1 hour tabletop with about 3 injects. That's about right to me. 2 or 3 injects an hour. More means that you're not having as in-depth conversations as you should, in my opinion. But this gives you sort of the setting, the background, citations to certain things that's getting from the articles. And that's one of the things that Feedly does. We cite all the data points from our LLM responses in the output. And you could always go back to that article and read about it if you need to. And yeah, and then I just killed it, but by clicking on it. But yeah, so it'll create the injects and all that stuff in there. So that's one of the resources that you'll take away from this. So go ahead and play with it, adapt it to your own use case. What I'm going to do now is shift gears and show you something else really quick. And change screens.
And just to address the question that was in the Q&A, yes, the prompts will be shared after in the follow-up email there.
Yep. Oh, actually, I had it here too. So just go through that output a little bit. You have the injects, situation that's posed to the group. Here's the evidence, some discussion questions to help guide the facilitator, and even like more direct facilitator notes on kind of, how you should respond depending on how things go. So this is like a very basic way to do it, and it gives you some ideas. And I'm in no means like saying use AI to turn off your brain and just do this for you. I think this is a great tool to get you like 80% there, and then it's up to you, or a skilled facilitator who knows the org context in order to tailor this a little bit more. But for me, this would cut down the time for planning a huge amount. Yeah, so this is a lot of cool, like pretty cool. Like you'll have different options, and it has the trade-offs mentioned here that you can kind of bring up in the hot wash at the end. So for Claude, I love Claude. This is what we use at Feedly, and I like using Cowork or using a project for something like this. And what I have here is a project that I created, and the instructions are really simple. I told it to use the Feedly MCP server as a resource for tabletops research, and I created a skill, a cyber tabletop skill, which will also share as a skill for you to use. And I think the killer instruction is really to ensure that the AI asks clarifying questions and not make any assumptions. So once it does that, it'll act sort of like a little consultant who's been hired to work with your org in order to personalize it. It's really cool. It's not the same, obviously, as a real consultant, but it's really neat and it'll get you up and running really quickly. And then the things that we have enabled are the Feedly Threat Graph MCP server. We have extended thinking turned on, and then web search as this fallback. And then here in the project, actually have a fictitious markdown file that has sort of like this organizational profile for context. So overview of the company, the executive leadership, key departments, a little bit of organizational knowledge, regulatory environment. So you can go as detailed or as generic as you want to. Obviously, the more detailed you get, the more tailored it will be, the more nuanced some of the text that's generated will be. But then here, I think I ran out of tokens last time I did this. So I wanted to show you how the chat sort of evolved when I was playing with this earlier today. So I basically asked in this TTX planning project folder to check for cyber attacks hitting my industry over the past month and filter on the ones that would be highest impact. And the latest model of Claude, Opus 4.6, it's pretty intelligent and it's actually really good at synthesizing data like this and creating those filters. So it tapped the Feedly threat graph, searched the attacks just like we did from the UI before, but now through chat. And then here, it actually suggested a few that might be good alternatives. Direct peer targeting, so sector relevant attacks that we could focus on. I picked Ameriprise Financial as a good one, but we could also drill into supply chain. And the whole reason to use the Feedly threat graph is really to focus it in on real threat data. And so it's pretty neat. It'd be a little bit involved, maybe 20 minutes for me sitting here and clicking through things. But what Claude does now too is it asks questions to clarify details as you go on. And then in the end, you can get a markdown document or even a PowerPoint created as a good starting point for the tabletop. But I just wanted to show you AI, I think, is especially useful for tabletop planning. Hallucinations are actually not that bad. They're kind of a good thing because you're kind of making stuff up anyway. But yeah, that's all I got. And I'll give it back to Andy and Shawn.
I think Andy, you were going to answer one of the questions live from Mike. I
Oh
guess
yeah,
we can
yeah.
run over a minute or two if you want. So I'll read the question. Apologies if I missed this or if you already covered it, but do you use collaboration tools like Teams or Slack during tabletop exercises? If so, do you leverage AI features such as Copilot, transcription, or summaries to capture takeaways, decisions, and action items?
Yep. To Dave's point, right? You do want to try and get these in person as much as you possibly can. Definitely would recommend having a channel for this if you were going to do it in like a Teams or Slack, so you can record right like actions, responses, all this stuff. I actually built a little Excel sheet that's going to be part of the resources as well to kind of record some of those after action items. So that you can do it yourself, or like you said, you can use Copilot. But I think having a dedicated person who can, like Dave mentioned, right, having a technical writer who could delve into those specific things that are being discussed may be a little bit better than some of those transcriptions, just because they'll be able to maybe prompt or something like that. Dave, any had anything else on that one?
Yeah, I don't think it matters what software you've got. I think ideally you have a shared screen that has the detail, the inject displayed, and then video. So it could be Microsoft Teams. You could have a dedicated channel just for the tabletop. That's a great idea. And then invite those people to participate. Sometimes you have to be a little bit more accommodating for executives who don't want to, be added to a channel, and you just kind of invite them to the call and you deal with it that way. So.
Hey, one more question because it kind of spoke to me. Have y'all ever tried to make retro D&D style gamification? I saw some projects utilizing story mode with visual generated material. It was really fun to see. This is to my making them fun idea.
Yes. I actually made it. I started off, I got really into tabletops and actually like, oh, I want to do this with my kids, which is a weird idea. But I did it with like D&D and I used like Gemini Voice. They have a voice API and you can actually talk to it. And so it was like a live dungeon master thing. But I thought, oh man, this would be super cool to do in a tabletop situation. But I haven't built that yet. So yeah, it's a cool idea.
I can
Awesome.
vouch. Dave's actually shown me this tabletop thing. It's pretty cool.
All right. Well, hopefully that'll be something that Dave will build and we can share with everyone. But anyway, thanks so much, guys, for doing this. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. We will share everything that we talked about, including the video, the slides, the prompt, in a link that'll come in an email tomorrow. So, and then somebody's sharing something about the Black Hills InfoSec
Yes.
tools. I know you guys are familiar with those. Any
Yes.
comment on that?
Yeah, I got let's see, I got backdoors and breaches. Oh, I can't even see it. There we go. Got that here. It's upside down. There you go. That, that was really cool too. So other resources to look at are those decks from Backdoors and Breaches. It was like a freebie giveaway thing by Black Hill Security, awesome company. But yeah, just get creative. There's templates out there. I think CISA came up with some as well for tabletops. So a lot of good resources.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks for the comments in the chat. We always appreciate that in the Q&A, and we'll see you on the next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks. Bye.
All right, awesome. Take care, guys.